Hey y'all, thanks for being here today. This is important for our family with the 2025 strategic planning. We look forward to learning from you, hearing about your ideas. This particular session I'm super stoked about because it addresses some of the thinking around what our young population has for solutions to these complex problems in the environment and on the social front. So we're going to present a body of work, some research that should be informative about how we are thinking about the 2025 plan. And then there's going to be a cool panel discussion where we're going to hear from you about some of the challenges that you're facing and how you're looking at solving for them. I'm particularly interested as the chair of the home region to learn more about how you're thinking about affordable housing. We understand that first-time home ownership is incredibly important and to this demographic. So we're working to address that in our thinking. The other piece, which I found very interesting, was the entrepreneurial spirit. And that is something I'm very proud to see in the research because it shows that many of you want to start your own businesses. And we know how important that is for the economic viability moving forward for the country. So with that, I'm going to kick it over to Kristen. Thanks again for sharing, and we look forward to listening and hearing what's happening.
Thank you, Tom, and thank you to the Walton Family Foundation for including me in this research project. Over the last few years, I've had a number of opportunities to do research on millennials and Generation Z on behalf of the Walton Family Foundation, and I can truly tell you this is one of the most exciting research projects I've had to be a part of. I'm honored today to share with you some of our latest findings from the survey we conducted over the last summer all the way through January of 2021. Working with the Walton Family Foundation, we wanted to explore where do these generations stand on their own futures? Do they expect to be able to find success, to move up the ladder, to achieve the American dream? What do they want for their lives, and what hurdles stand in their way? We did 2 surveys, and what we heard was a consistent message across both of those studies, that young Americans believe their futures will be bright and that success is possible, but won't be possible without big change. Now, young people, however, view themselves as having a major role to play in making that change happen. So let's start out with the good news. 3 out of 4 believe that most people in their generation who work hard will have the opportunity to succeed in life. And 7 in 10 believe that they personally will be able to move up the economic ladder from where they are today. Furthermore, 2/3 believe that they personally will have the opportunity to achieve the American dream. Now, in our research, we wanted to follow up, find out what people actually meant by that. And as it turns out, the American dream is not some narrow concept of a white picket fence and 2.3 kids or anything like that, but instead, for most millennials and Gen Zers, means the ability to choose your own adventure, to have opportunity to build the life you want for yourself. But we didn't get all sunshine and roses in this survey. In fact, we heard that there are lots of barriers that young people feel are standing in their way. Only half of young people actually believe that they'll be better off than their parents were. And when we asked respondents if they think things are going well or not for their generation, only 1/4 said that they think things are going well. The point isn't that Gen Z and millennials think everything is fantastic. Rather, that confidence they feel that things will ultimately be okay for them is that they feel strongly that they have the ability to create change. In our survey, only 1 out of 6 think things are going poorly and that there's little hope for change. Instead, we find about half, the plurality in our survey, who say that even though they think things aren't going very well, they will, as a generation, be able to work to make things better. In fact, 70% say that they believe their generation will either adapt to overcome obstacles or will create the change necessary to eliminate obstacles entirely. And what obstacles do they face? Among the biggest problems millennials and Gen Z say they face are things like lack of affordable housing, expensive higher education, and the lack of the right connections to be able to build their careers and futures. These are the hurdles that they think will make it hardest for them to succeed. So what can make change happen? Who will drive change? How will they drive it? And why will they be the ones to drive it? Well, we asked them, what people or institutions do you think will play a role in bringing about positive change during your lifetime? And the top 2 answers we heard were elected officials in the future and me. They view themselves personally as having a major role to play, a bigger role to play than even today's elected officials, the media, celebrities. This is the case for both the Gen Z and millennials, viewing that they personally expect to play a role in that change. When we ask what generation or generations will play the role in creating that change overall, the most popular answer, 59%, point to their own generation. They say, my generation will be the one to do it. They feel confident that whatever messes they encounter, it will be people from their generation who are equipped to address those problems. Even within key issue areas like education and the environment, that confidence really shines through. When we asked who they think will play a role in creating positive change in K-12 schools, the top answer in our survey was teachers and principals from my generation. On the issue of environment and water quality, essentially tied at the top of the list of expected change makers, scientists from my generation. So why them? Why their own generation? Well, we asked them why they felt they could change or overcome things. And some quotes from our survey responses include, quote, "I think this strictly because my generation stands up for themselves. That's it. That's the tweet. We know what is right and what's wrong and aren't scared to express that." Or another respondent who said, "I think we're the scrappy generation. We've gone through so many altering historical events that we are well prepared to change things." We found in our research that millennials and Gen Z feel that history has thrown a lot at them, that they've been able to respond well, to adapt effectively, and to find their own voice, and they look forward to using that voice to make change. But finally, what are the mechanisms of change? What would be effective at creating change? We offered our respondents over a dozen different options, from signing petitions to posting on social media, and we found the top tier of ways that millennials and Gen Z think that change will get made is voting in elections, starting or working for a company focused on solving a problem, volunteering or donating to charitable causes, or starting and working for nonprofits focused on solving a problem. It's a mix of politics, business, and philanthropic approaches. There are so many tools that Gen Z and millennials have at their disposal and are ready to use all of them to make change. The bottom line is that millennials and Gen Z feel optimistic about the future, but it's not because they think things are great as is. Instead, it's because they feel confident that they, both personally and as a generation, can channel their desire for change into meaningful, effective action that can open doors and tear down the barriers that stand in their way. And they're not waiting for anyone else to do it. Now, I'd like to hand things over to Chelsea Peters, who has an incredible group of next generation leaders here to give their thoughts on how the millennials and Gen Z will change the world for the better. Chelsea, take it away.
Kristen, thanks so much for those valuable insights. And good afternoon, everyone. I'm Chelsea Peters, Chief Strategy Officer at the Walton Family Foundation. And I am so excited to facilitate this discussion on next generation leadership and what it will take to achieve the change millennials and Generation Z want to see in their communities and across the country. Kristen's research underscores key lessons, attributes, what we know about these generations and what makes them tick. But now we want to bring it all to life by engaging directly with two Gen Z activists, already breaking down barriers to success and serving as agents of change in their own communities. Listening to, learning from, and collaborating with next-gen changemakers is essential to us at the Walton Family Foundation. We know that millennials, Gen Zers, this vast population of self-determined, socially conscious, digital natives are on a life mission to use their skills, their resources, their networks to do good, hold institutions and each other accountable, and champion a more just, peaceful, and vibrant society. That is why it's important in today's world more than ever to harness that power and collective strength of young people to support innovation, community development, and problem solving, to support their vision of a brighter future. Our panelists today lead by example and are Gen Z changemakers that will show us the way. They will show how they are thinking about the future and what they think it will take to drive meaningful change. Josh Bellamy is Vice President of Morehouse More Green on the campuses of Morehouse College, Clark Atlanta University, and Spelman College, where he is working to create a more accessible conservation movement through the Audubon. Anya Dua is the founder and president of Gen Z Identity Lab, fostering conversation among young people about the ever-changing world around us. Josh and Anya, thank you so much for being here today and for sharing your stories and aspirations with us. So, To dive in, to warm up the conversation, let's do a quick round of introductions. Share a little bit about yourself and your role as an activist, and maybe one line or one word on the change you want to see in the world. Josh, why don't we start with you and then we can pass it to Anya.
Yeah, so my name is Josh Bellamy. My pronouns are him, his, and he. In the role as an activist, I like to call myself an educator. And everything that I love to do, I want to make sure that people have the right information to make their own decisions and how they can impact their environment. But yeah.
My name is Anya Dua, and my pronouns are she, her, and I am really actually just passionate about bringing people into the conversation that weren't previously in the conversation, whether that's young people or people of different races, sexuality, gender, and political beliefs, because I think when we don't understand a certain group of people, we don't have as good relations with them and we feel a sort of hostility and a misunderstanding. And when we cross that bridge of understanding, even if we don't agree with someone or understand or, share their experiences, we can have a better country and a better future. And that's really what I'm passionate about.
Thank you, Josh. Thank you, Anya. I think I'm already feeling inspired by the change that you want to see in the world. So now that we're warmed up, we just heard from Kristen about the overwhelming optimism of your generation, Generation Z. Yet your generation has grown up with instability and disruption. You've grown up in the shadow of the terror attacks of September 11th, of 2 wars, of a financial crisis, of gun violence, and now a global pandemic forcing you and your peers out of the classroom. So why do you think your generation is so optimistic despite these formidable challenges during your lifetime? And I want you each to give a quick response to this. And Anya, I would love to start with you.
Yeah, so actually, I think that Gen Zers, I can't speak on millennials, but Gen Zers have more of a realistic view of the world today, and maybe even a pessimistic view of the world today, but an optimistic view of the future and our ability to change the future and make positive change. So for instance, I talked to a group of college students about how the coronavirus has affected, they're looking at their career and their education, and one of them said something that was really impactful, which is, my interest is still in international relations and economic development. What COVID-19 did for me was highlight the increasing need for competent leadership in the public service sector. My resolve is hardened to be one of those competent leaders instead of wishing for one to come around. And I think that really embodies Gen Z's spirit about the future and our optimism about the future, which is that we are able to identify problems in our society and focus ourselves and our passions towards making a better future.
Thank you, Anya. And Josh, what motivates you or inspires you to stay positive and optimistic in today's world?
Well, I would just like to say is that it's simply our youth. We've been told since we were, little bitties that the sky is the limit. And so with that being told to me since I was young, I feel like anything that I want to do, I should be able to reach for it. And with that in mind, I think that makes us so tenacious and so determined to make sure that we employ change in this world. So I just put that all on our youth, honestly, and it's just that simple.
Great. Well, I think you said it. The sky is absolutely the limit. And I also think that optimism it's inspiring, it's unifying, especially during this difficult time in our country. And so thank you, Anya and Josh, for kind of lifting us up and reminding us of the silver linings and bright spots. So let's talk about the American dream. We've learned that the definition and concept of the American dream, the white picket fence, the 2 kids, it's changing. And it now has, a meaning where you have the ability and the freedom to pursue whatever life you want, that you get to choose your own destiny. And so, Josh, I want to direct this question first to you. Do you believe in the American dream? And does this new definition, does this resonate with you and when you think about your future?
Thank you so much for that question. And it's a very good question. I will say I do believe in the American dream, but I also want to stage it as this. We've been told that the American dream Well, the American dream is under the assumption that we're all able to reach for it or have it. And history has told us that that is not true. So we want to make sure that we're changing that narrative to make sure that people have equal opportunities and have equal access to those opportunities. So as long as we're following that, I think that the American dream is still alive. Yes.
So just to double click on that a little bit. So how do you think we can ensure that people do have access? What do you think that looks like? What do you think we need to do to ensure that equality and opportunity for all?
So just how Audubon did for me, making sure that those doors are open to not just one voice and one face, but making sure that when we are creating programs and creating all of these initiatives, that anyone, despite their demographic, will be able to have access or reach those opportunities. So just having that door open, I think, is how you get more people involved, and making sure that those interests are all working together to for just our one goal, which is conservation.
That's really great. So yeah, keeping that door open and then making sure or encouraging people to walk through it. I love that. Anya, what about you? How do you see the American dream, and does that align with your vision for the future?
Yeah, so I think it's a really interesting question. I spent a lot of time over the summer actually exploring this question because I was a part of an amazing group of other passionate young Gen Zers who in high school and college, and we were creating a podcast called Untextbooked, which was all about sort of changing the way we learn and teach history, because I think a lot of young people are alienated from history because it's just like, oh, let's read this textbook front to back, not that interesting. What are you really going to get from it? But you can actually learn a lot about your own identity and your own place in the world from history. And I chose to read a book by Jill Lepore called These Truths, which was actually a book of American history. And it explored the question of the American experiment in democracy and opportunity. And was that successful, and what does that look like today? And, sort of through that experience, I was able to read and learn about the experiences of so many different types of people throughout American history, and myself as being like half Indian, also half Caucasian, and my parents are from California and Australia. I was sort of always confused about where I fit into the American dream. But since starting the Gen Z Identity Lab, I realized that what I think is so special about Gen Z is how, passionate we are. And like Josh, I have not educated myself nearly as much as I would like to on the conservation movement, but it's just so interesting that people who, across the country are finding these topics that they care about, and they're able to do something with that even from a young age. And to me, I think that is the American dream, not a story of, money, which obviously that is important, but this hope to be able to channel your passions and actually make a difference. And I think that's really inspiring.
Anya, it's beautifully said. I think really underscoring the American dream and reframing it to be about purpose is, I think, really hits home. I'm going to quickly just now, on the flip side of this, what do you think, and I'll start with you, Josh, what do you think is one barrier that you see standing in your way of achieving the American dream that you aspire toward?
That's a good question. And I will say that racism has been a long time divide between people. And honestly, I don't think it should be. As long as that we all have one goal, it shouldn't matter on, the color of our skin and what we may look like and where we may come from. That shouldn't matter. As long as we're all achieving our goal, I think that is our, that's where we can find commonality. So, and Generation Z, I can say, has been on the forefront of that and making that change and just seeing people for who they are. And instead of asking for respect, we are demanding it. So I will say that about Generation Z.
That's great. Anya, anything to add there? What could possibly stand in your way of achieving the American dream?
Yeah, well, I completely agree with what Josh is saying, generally speaking. And, in terms of just more generally, something that I've been thinking about is I think Gen Z is extremely passionate. It's what we've been talking about, throughout this time. But I do think that passion is not going to be productively channeled towards a positive future for America if we don't learn how to be more open to hearing different opinions and exploring those opinions and experiences of people in different areas of the country with different identities, because that's really what makes up America. And we don't have to agree with someone, and someone's opinion may not even be worthy of your respect, but I do think that it's really important to be open to hearing those opinions, because having compassion in that sense towards other people is, I think, something that our generation really needs to work on if we want to see a better future.
Thank you. Absolutely. I think the two of you are reminding us all that with hardship or adversity comes growth and opportunity, and that we all can play a role in catalyzing change, bringing people together, treating each other respectfully, and shaping positive outcomes and growth. So thank you for that. And I think just across the board, the world has been watching Gen Zers, change the world through their action for a while now. I'm thinking of Greta Thunberg or the Parkland students, to Malala. And so Anya, I would love, given your work with the Gen Z Identity Lab Network, what do you want people to know about Gen Z activism, and how is it different from past generations and how they've activated?
Yeah, so I think the obvious first major difference is social media. And I think it's interesting because social media activism within itself also changes all the time. Instagram was obviously always the major form of social media activism, but also in, I think, the past year, there's been a huge rise, I've seen at least, in activism on TikTok because of the algorithm. It's a lot easier to go viral and to reach, you could reach millions of people with one video. And that is something that's a really incredible resource. And Gen Zers are using that community and that sense of sort of trust and relatability on TikTok to really garner attention from people and to grow their platform. And I think that that is a huge testament to how activism is changing. And then I also think that there's a sense that Gen Z is willing to challenge authority and challenge the status quo. If looking at, the summer of 2020, a lot of schools, my own school, had students created Instagram accounts exposing instances of racism and sexual assault in the school. And that's something that I think is sort of unprecedented at schools in America, sort of this standing up against the administration, speaking out, even risking retaliation and putting yourself out there and being vulnerable. And Gen Zers aren't afraid to do that. And we're going to bring that sort of activist sense and mentality to our workplace in the future. We're not afraid to stand up to authority and challenge the status quo. Yeah.
Well, there you have it. I want to tease out this idea of social media activism, knowing that Gen Z, you're the first generation to grow up with technology, the internet, social media at your fingertips. So the access to information, access to people, the interconnectedness that the digital world provides. And Josh, I would love to understand, how you've used social media. Well, one, what social media platforms do you primarily spend your time on? And two, how you've used social media or just, technology to amplify your efforts or spur additional change or bring people together around the environment movement?
So I think the best platform I've been using is Instagram. And I love Instagram just because it allows you to use pictures, and oftentimes pictures can tell or convey a story much better than words can. And I think that's probably the easiest way to probably talk about hard topics is just to use imagery and help people form their own opinions that way instead of just throwing messages and, large words such as sustainability, conservation, environmental justice. A lot of times people don't know what those terms mean. So when you show an image, you kind of give a meaning and a definition that way. So I think that has definitely been a good method in terms of educating people. And with Morehouse More Green, what we use with our Instagram, we make sure that we are staying current with today's events. So last year, I believe in 2020, Australia suffered from that terrible wildfire. And through that entire time, we're advocating for Australia, making sure that people are understanding the origins of wildfires and how wildfires come to be. And with that education, I learned that most wildfires are man-made, and a lot of those are by fault of man. So making sure that we're educating people and knowing or teaching them things on how they can better protect their environment is step one. And Instagram has definitely been that kind of platform. And just staying in contact with members of the AUC and then also communities outside of my own. I think that's also something good about Instagram.
That's great. I love the idea that images can almost create a common language to create awareness and to activate people around the issues that you're promoting on social. So that's really great. Anya, I'd love for you to answer this question as well, or anything to add here.
No, I mean, I completely agree with what Josh was saying. I personally use Instagram and TikTok the most. I also think that part of what's becoming really important for Gen Z activism is the aesthetic of the social media posts and the TikTok posts. I think you're sort of almost creating, you're obviously creating a brand, but also it's sort of what sort of world do you want to transport the viewer to? And something that I think is really important about what Josh was saying about the wildfires is I learned so much on Instagram about the wildfires, and since my family is from Australia, it's something that I really, really cared about, and it was honestly heartbreaking to see. And I had never educated myself really about wildfires before, and I was more looking at like the political side of it, and I thought it was crazy how the Prime Minister went on vacation to Hawaii during the wildfires and stuff like that, and there was just sense of outrage. But also at the same time, people on Instagram raised so much money to help with the firefighters, and I think that that's incredibly powerful, the fundraising that can happen over social media.
Absolutely, that's great. I do want to ask, though, in addition to awareness creating and obviously having Instagram be essentially a source of news or a source of information for you to understand what's going on around the world and to understand the issues that your friends and peers and influencers care about, have you taken any action? For instance, the wildfires, when you saw that, Anya, on social, did it propel you or inspire you to take an additional action other than just being more educated about the specific issue at hand?
Well, I mean, it was more of, I think it was a lot of it was education. Also, I donated money to help support firefighter funds, and I posted a lot about it on social media and encouraged my friends to donate as well. And I think, up to that point, living in America, there's not much more I could have done. But I do think that it's also made me a lot more cognizant of wildfires going forward, wildfires at home in America. And I think it's almost scary about how the nature can almost revolt against us. And I think it's not something that we talk about enough. And so I'm really interested in what Josh is doing for that.
Yeah, and I can speak on a little bit more about it. For Morehouse More Green, we also did a donation drive called the Koala Fund. And we raised enough money just so we can send that to the Wildlife Conservation Fund for koalas in Australia, and making sure that they're building habitats, rebuilding habitats in Australia after, I believe, they lost about 90% of their habitat range. I could be wrong about the numbers, but
I remember
it was so it was a very large number. And so we wanted to make sure that people are learning about the effects that happen in Australia, and then how they can help with that change. And then honestly, money is probably the biggest change when it comes to or putting money into issues like that has probably been the biggest thing seen in Generation Z, and then also from other generations as well. Just coming together to put money, where it's needed most.
Well, I think you both just have, again, highlighted and underscored the power of peer-to-peer engagement, peer-to-peer fundraising, and really how technology and the tools that we have can really propel change and inspire and create a ripple effect of momentum and growth for good. So we've hit on some of these macro themes and the big picture so far. But we also know that social and environmental change, it starts local. So let's get a bit more into the specifics and break it down to the local and individual level. So we know clean air, fresh food, and inclusive communities that provide access to things like the arts and good schools. These are the three things that millennials and Gen Zers really care about. So what does it take to get there? How does someone advocate for these causes effectively, in your opinion? And Josh, I would love to start with you and have you talk, as we were about the environmental movement or environmental activism and what has worked, what hasn't worked. How can you be most effective in advocating and inspiring change?
Yeah, so what I've been doing with More House, More Green is making sure that we're being as inclusive as possible and making sure that we have different people, different genders in the room when we're making decisions about our organization, about our community as well. And when you bring multiple people into a room, you get multiple answers. You don't get the same kind of answer. So that makes for discussion for one, but that also pushes for change because we're not remaining stagnant. And I will say that has been amazing about Generation Z. We're all about keeping moving, making sure that there's progress and that we're not stagnant. And just having different people in the room, I think, can help with environmentalism, because when we're all fighting for conservation, it needs to be multiple voices, multiple faces, because I keep saying that we're not all one voice and we're not all one face, because that's not America. America is called the melting pot for a reason. So I think the conservation movement needs to reflect that. So I hope I answered your question.
Absolutely, you did. I would love to go a little deeper and understand the ways in which you think that we can be most effective in broadening or in widening our tent or in bringing more people and voices to the table. How can we do that in the environmental space better?
Collaborations, and I found that to be the best tool for student leading organizations. Collaborating with nonprofit organizations, one, educates you because we don't have all the answers, and collaborating or networking with organizations who have been in this fight for a long time not only trains you and molds you, but it's that camaraderie, that support, and it kind of shows that we're all together in this. So just collaborating with other organizations and sharing your resources can do a lot for student organizations on their campuses, in their communities. So just making sure these big names, these big powers are coming down to our grassroots and sharing those resources that they have, and making sure that we're all headed into change.
Thank you, Josh. Anya, I'm going to pass it over to you. Anything to add there? Any additional context?
Yeah, actually, I did a statistically significant survey, one of my first actually, in 2020 about climate change, and I looked actually at a sample of 1,000 Gen Zers in Australia and in America. And just looking at the American data, some things I found really interesting were that in terms of who Gen Z thinks should be responsible for solving problems related to climate change, 75% believe that the government should be responsible for solving or, addressing climate change, followed by scientists, businesses, and consumers. And there is this sense of, upset in Gen Z. You can see that in the climate change protests. 62% believe that leaders in Washington are not taking enough action. 50% of Gen Zers are angry at past generations for not doing more to address climate change. And some of the most popular policy actions they want to see talked about are the use of renewable energy sources and investing in clean energy, electric vehicles, and imposing stricter fuel efficiency and emission standards for cars. I think that there is a lot to be said for demanding certain policies and voting for certain politicians to really get this agenda pushed through, because it's climate change is at such a macro scale right now. And it's such a big issue that a lot of Gen Zers really feel like we want to see the government take widespread and comprehensive action against climate change.
Thanks, Anya. Well, I think both you and Josh just described a myriad of ways to advocate, to be an activist. And we know through our research, to your point, Anya, that the three biggest ways to do that are: one, voting. So ensuring that you have the officials and the government in place that reflect the policies that you care about. Two, starting or working for an organization that is problem solving, that is tackling big problems that you want to address, or 3, volunteering your time to issue-based causes. So I think you both just hit on that, but I want to really, Anya, pass it back over to you and talk about your experience and your journey as an entrepreneur. You started this company, you know a number of entrepreneurs, you have a growth mindset. Have you found starting your own organization as the most effective way to drive change? What have you learned through that experience? And if you were to start it back over again, is that the way that you would want to enforce change?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I mean, in terms of whether it is the best way to create change, I'm not really honestly sure that it is. I think that almost starting your own organization, especially, if you see a gap in society where that need is not being addressed, that issue is not being addressed, I think that is really important. And I think that learning the skills of entrepreneurship has been, one of the most important lessons that I've learned, learning how to network. I have like a spreadsheet of all the people that I've talked to and have been interested, and I reach back out to them to update them. Like, it's just a lot of work, but it's been extremely rewarding. But in terms of actually creating change, I actually strongly believe that Gen Z should take this entrepreneurial mindset and this growth mindset and this ability to challenge authority and ability to challenge the status quo and bring it to more established companies and organizations, some of the biggest nationwide organizations. That's why I'm so excited to work with the Walton Family Foundation, sort of get that recognition from you guys and talk to you guys and get those connections with people at more established research companies, because I'm still young, and what my role is, as I see it, is not to only focus on the success of the Gen Z Identity Lab, but to use that success to reach my message to the people in power and to reach my message to established companies and show them that acknowledging Gen Zers and acknowledging our, values is incredibly important for the future.
Thank you, Anya. I'll even go a step further to say it's not just about acknowledging, it's about embracing and lifting up. I mean, I think Generation Z, you're entrepreneurial, socially conscious, clearly digitally connected. And Josh, to your point, you don't just tolerate diversity or even accept it, you expect it and embrace it. And I think that really, when you put all of those together, I think it's really smart, Anya, to have a top-down, bottom-up approach and really bring people together to collaborate and partner and amplify efforts that are aligned and in sync with what you care about. Josh, I would love to, again, kind of dig a little deeper on the things that you see as critical to unlocking change through activism, through inclusion. I think you mentioned that a few times, but is there anything else that you're missing here?
Yes, I can shed a little bit more about that. So what I was thinking about recently is that there are a lot of volunteer opportunities out there, and we've all been told that volunteer is what builds our experience. But I think it needs to take a step further. I think that Generation Z needs to start being paid for their experiences and things that they've been working on, just because it does matter, and we need to know that we have value with what we're doing. And oftentimes organizations just take our experience, what little it may be, and our talents, and for free. And I honestly think that does need to change. I think there needs to be more paid opportunities just to do the same kind of work. Because our work does matter and it does have value. So it just needs to be shown in that. But I think that's all I wanted to say on the matter.
Thanks, Josh. I think it's really, really important. Similar to volunteerism, I kind of want to shift, and this will be the last question of our session, as much as I would love to spend all afternoon talking to you two. Let's talk about mentorship. There's been some buzz in the media and across business about how mentorship has evolved or is continuing to evolve. In many cases, instead of seasoned professional providing guidance or advice to younger people on strategic or cultural relevance, it's the other way around. I know Harvard Business Review has called it reverse mentoring. So I think we all know that mentorship, it goes both ways, right? That's where you get the greatest value. So I want to really just use this opportunity in our closing here. Tell us, audience comprised of millennials, boomers, Gen X, leaders across the country, tell us what we can do to support you in your efforts and your endeavors. And what do you want us to really know as we walk away from this conversation? And Anya, I'd love to start with you.
Yeah, so I think that the most important things are mentorship. I think that's the number one. This is just from my personal experience, but just being able to learn from professionals who, have so much to offer to me and my passions. It's just been incredible to be able to be introduced to people. And I really think that making introductions has, adults who have a conversation with me and I'm interested in what I'm doing and introduce me to somebody else that they think I'd like to talk to. Like, that is really so incredibly valuable for me. And in terms of this reverse mentorship idea and what I can offer to them, I think that it's really important when talking about, sort of my area, which is research, is a lot of research is kind of goes under the rug. It goes into academic journals, or it gets quoted once in an article, which is not unimportant at all, but it doesn't really get the reach and the impact that it could have because there is no effort to do so. There is no social media campaign around the research. There is no outreach to younger people. And I think people underestimate the power of qualitative and quantitative research and data in changing people's minds and shifting people's perspectives. And I think that is really important. And just one last thing I wanted to say before I let Josh speak is looking overall at what we've been talking about today and this sense of Gen Z as an activist generation and very optimistic. I think that we all should be a little bit careful to quickly label Gen Z in that way, just as millennials were labeled as being lazy and liking avocado toast. I think it's dangerous to label Gen Z in this way because the reality is that for instance, in a survey that I did in May about how coronavirus has affected Gen Zers, 74% of respondents said they had been depressed, anxious, or both in the last week. And I think that it's really important not to forget the emphasis of mental health and the prevalence that has in Gen Zers' lives, whether it affects you in a big way or a small way. I think that's something we all think about. And over the course of the coronavirus, Gen Zers have become more conscientious of their mental health, actually, and taking up more practices. And I've interviewed a bunch of people across the country, and they've said that they've taken up practices like yoga and going on walks and journaling. And just different self-care practices are becoming extremely important to Gen Zers, and this sense of a work-life balance is also becoming extremely important to Gen Zers. And so when thinking about welcoming Gen Zers into the workforce, I think it's important to think about how we have different expectations of what work is going to be like. Yes, we're passionate. Yes, we care about the world, but we also have this history of struggling with mental illness, and the coronavirus has given us the chance to pause and reflect on that and sort of adjust our values. So I think that that's what I wanted to leave you with.
Thank you, Anya. I can't underscore that point enough around mental health. So thank you for making it. And Josh, I want to make sure we have time to hear your remarks.
Yeah, so I just want to say, don't count us out. And the one thing I want to say about Generation Z, and just for other generations to know about us, is that you shouldn't underestimate us. Like we've learned throughout this entire conference, is that we grew up with technology. So that means we kind of grew up with modern information. And truthfully, generations before us, they have frames of information from 20, 30 years ago. Not to say that we shouldn't listen to you because you have that information, but I think you should take more onus to listen to us because we have more current and modern information that will work hand in hand with information that you grew up with and that you've seen in your years. But what we can learn from our mentors and people who are older from us is to slow down. what I realized about Generation Z is that we're always on the go. We're always trying to make sure that there's progress, but we never take that reflexive analysis on our own lives and seeing where things went wrong and see where things went right. So when you take that reflexive analysis, that also builds you and it develops you in your career and in your life. So making sure that we're taking that reflexive analysis, I do think that we can learn from our mentors and older generations as well. But what I do want to leave with is to make sure that other generations are listening to Generation Z, because our voices do matter. And like I said, we do have modern information, and we want to make sure that that information is being put to good work. So definitely work with us, and we are going to definitely work with you as we move for a better future in conservation.
Well, thank you, Anya. Thank you, Josh. I don't think we could have had a better closing. And Josh, to your point, I don't think we could ever underestimate you. I think through this conversation, you've shown us your brilliance, your know-how, your vulnerabilities, and your acute awareness of where your generation is and what is really needed to achieve success. And I think everyone listening, I think it will all want to come together and to help us all grow and be better together. So I so appreciate your time, your thinking. And I know one of my favorite quotes now from Gen Z, Amanda Gorman, is don't hesitate, don't wait, don't aspire, achieve. And I think you guys are doing exactly that. So again, thank you so much. And thank you everyone for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yes, thank you so much. Thank you for this opportunity.